I'm Dr. Suraj Samtani. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm also a postdoctoral research fellow at the Center for Healthy Brain Aging at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. I'd just like to start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands from where we are all joining today and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend my respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today. Thank you very much for being here. So, just to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Center for Healthy Brain Aging, we are a self funded research institute within UNSW Sydney, and we do research on healthy aging and dementia. Our goal is to have healthy cognitive aging for everyone in Australia. And we have a particular strength in that we have many longitudinal studies which follow people over time to understand what are the risk and protective factors for brain health over time. And that includes the Maintain Your Brain trial, which Professor Henry Brodati has successfully led, which shows that we can delay the onset of dementia, and the memory and aging study. We're also currently running a memory and aging study too, where we follow people over time to see how we can reduce risk of dementia. So let's talk about our topic today, which is social connection. And this is so important because we normally focus a lot on biomedical causes of cognitive decline, but we rarely pay attention to the psychological and social factors that are really crucial for our brain health. So we're going to start off with a 30-second activity. I just want you to take a second to close your eyes, and I want you to visualize a connection that you have with someone. It could be a person or an animal that makes you feel joy. You notice that as we focus on this connection, we start to feel a sense of lightness, of brightness. It feels like warm sunlight filling the body. And that's because social connection release our love chemical, which is oxytocin, which is like a warm feeling we get throughout our body, and it reduces our stress. Now, this is really important in the context of brain health because we know how poorly the brain reacts to chronic stress. And social connection is one of the windows we have for reducing that stress level. So before I talk about what we can do, let's establish some of the facts. Firstly, a lot of people think that as we get older, we tend to get more lonely, but actually the opposite is true. As we tend to get older, our loneliness levels tend to fall because we focus more and more on positive social connections and interactions. We're very selective with the people that we spend time with as we get older. And it's also important to know that loneliness isn't the same as living alone. You can see here that compared to 30% of people living with others who feel lonely, similarly, 40% of people living alone feel lonely. Obviously, it's a higher number, but living with others isn't the only thing that impacts our level of loneliness, which is actually quite subjective. What about mental health? Well, we know that 1 in 5 people have moderate distress levels after the age of 65. Now, this is very comparable to other age groups and is actually not higher than at other age groups. So, once again, showing that as we get older, we are actually quite resilient in our minds. In fact, study after study shows us that as we get older, our happiness level increases. It's called the U shaped curve of happiness or the smile. We know that we're really happy when we're children, and our lowest level of happiness is often in midlife, especially when we have teenage children. And as we get older, because we have this superpower of focusing on positive people and positive connections and weeding out the rest, we tend to experience increasing levels of happiness and life satisfaction. So, let's talk about loneliness in the current context. In the years since COVID, obviously loneliness levels have spiked. We saw in 2021 when a lot of people were in lockdowns that loneliness levels had increased from 6% to 21% in the world, which is quite a lot of people. Now, in clinical practice, I see three types of people now. One, the first group, they were really extroverted, always super social. They stayed social. The second group of people, they withdrew from social interactions during that time, but have since bounced back, mostly. The third group of people is the group that I worry about. These are people who withdrew from social interactions or were already quite isolated when lockdowns were implemented and never really socialized after that. So, this leads to a problem because we know that loneliness and depression and having fewer social supports are actually linked to an increased risk of dementia. I'm sure you've heard all about this throughout the day, so I won't go into it. You know, dementia is an umbrella term, with Alzheimer's being the most common type. And we know how many people in Australia are impacted by this. Because these numbers are growing, dementia is actually no longer the second leading cause, as it says on the slide, but since late last year, it is now the leading cause of death in Australia, which is why we should really care about this. So let's talk about our context here. I know you're all here because you're either receiving in home care or helping someone with in home care. So let's be specific. In home care, we get people often who don't want to leave the room, don't want to leave the home, might lack confidence. And that's totally normal because it's normal to worry about not being able to hear someone in a group or keep up with conversations because of that or because of changes in memory. Worrying about not being able to remember people's names or important details about them, as we'll see soon in a couple of examples. And also worrying about practical things like, well, I might get lost if I go outside. I might not find where I parked my car. And now I don't want to put myself in that situation again. And also worrying about having times of day when energy is really low. And that's normal too. But I'm here to remind you that social connections are really key for our health. So let's talk about how this works. Let's start off with a couple of examples. So these are based on cases that I've seen. I've changed the details and the names and the picture to preserve their confidentiality. We'll call the first person Joanna. So Joanna came to me after she had retired. She was feeling a bit confused and feeling that her memory was starting to change. And she was really worried about how to manage that. She thought maybe she had depression, maybe she was experiencing early signs of dementia. She just wasn't sure. Let's go to our second story. We'll call this person Sam. So, Sam's wife passed away a few years ago. He came to me after experiencing a sudden decline in his health. He'd had a fall in the home. Now he has to use a walking stick. He's also noticed that his memory has changed a lot. He's forgetting a lot of information, and he's now afraid to go anywhere, even leave his room, because A, he's worried about walking, and B, he's worried about not remembering things about people and embarrassing himself. So I want you to remember those two stories as we go through this information. And the reason why I talk about social health is because that's the area that I research at the Center for Healthy Brain Aging. And if you look at the risk factors here in later life, social isolation is actually the biggest risk factor in later life for cognitive decline and dementia. So, because we knew that, we wanted to study it more, but we really didn't know what were the key ingredients about social interactions which helped us to keep our brains healthy. So, that was my job to figure it out. One of the things that always shocks me is the finding from the Harvard study of adult development, which is the longest running study in the world and has been following people for many decades. And what they found was that loneliness is as bad for us as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's really, really bad for us. And the other thing that is actually the best finding out of the Harvard study is that people at the end of their life, when they looked at them, who had the most healthy years of life and who developed chronic conditions like diabetes and cardiovascular disease really early, there was one difference between those people, and that was how many social connections they had that were good quality. So, being socially connected actually is the key ingredient for delaying the start of chronic health conditions in our lives. So, my job when I took on this project was not just to reestablish that social health was important, but to create a recipe of social health and understand what ingredients do we need for good brain health and just how much do we need. So we went about assembling the ingredients, and I'll let you have a second to read them here. What we wanted to know was which of these is associated with higher or lower risk of cognitive decline. So let's have a look. What we did is we brought together raw data from many longitudinal studies from all around the world, 13 studies representing every continent except Antarctica. We had almost 40,000 people who were followed up for up to 14 years. And what was incredible is that all of these studies are part of a consortium called Cosmic, which is something that is led at Chiba, actually, by our other co-director, Professor Parminder Sachdev. So in looking at this data, we wanted to know, are social connections important? But there's no point looking at this association without accounting for all the other risk factors that we already know are important. So we accounted for all the other non-risk factors first. And what we found was even after doing that, social connections reduced our risk of dementia, not just by a little, but by half. People who had really good quality social connections, their risk of dementia was half compared to those who didn't. And the ones in Navy here are the ones that were specifically linked to a reduced risk. People who had interactions with friends or family at least once a month. People who didn't feel lonely very often. And very critically, people who had a confidant, someone they could open their heart to when they felt stressed. And you'll see this keeps popping up over and over again. You'll see just how important it is to have someone you trust to talk to. Because we next also looked at what reduced our risk of early mortality. And in this case, it was with people who lived with others, who did frequent community activities, and again, people who had a confidant to talk to. These are the people who lived longer lives. But we also wanted to know, well, what happens if somebody's already experiencing changes in their memory and thinking and has a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment or is living with dementia? Well, we found that actually social groups are quite effective in reducing loneliness, especially walking groups or music groups, even dance groups and reading groups. Any kind of group activity can be really helpful. What was really interesting is that in studies where they had people with more later stages of dementia, people who couldn't use their language skills as much as before, music groups and dance groups were really effective in reducing loneliness because you don't need to talk. And music is something that is a universal language that connects us all. So a lot of people ask me, well, what kind of social connections do you need for good mental health? And the answer to this is that you specifically need emotional support, not practical support, not information support. We just published a study in the American Journal of Epidemiology, where we again brought together studies from all around the world and we compared different types of support and people who had that confidant. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, it could be their doctor, it could just be someone that they trust. It doesn't matter who it is. That this was linked to less risk of anxiety and depression now and in the future. A lot of people are curious in this modern age where we have video calls and Teams, webinars, are virtual connections good enough? And while we haven't done this research specifically, research from around the world tells us that virtual connections are about half as powerful as face to face interactions, in that they are quite good, but nothing is going to replace the hug that you get from a dear friend or family member. My advice to you is if you're having regular video calls with friends or family who live somewhere else, please keep doing that because that is really, really helpful for your brain health. So, why does this all work? Why do social connections help us? Well, we think it's because of two pathways. The first is bridging. So social connections with a variety of people helps us to keep our mind and body active because we might do activities with them. We might play card games or board games or chess or read with them or go on walks with them. All of these things build the opportunity to stimulate our minds and keep our bodies healthy. The second way comes back to having a confidant. This is the social bonding pathway where having someone you trust that you can talk to reduces your level of chronic stress and inflammation in the body, reduces your risk of depression, which is another risk factor for dementia. And that's why we think this works. So, what are some practical strategies for you to start using? Well, first, let's understand this from a clinical psychology perspective. We know that the biggest driver of anxiety is actually avoidance. The less I do something, the more unsure I will feel. And when I'm anxious, I know that other people are going to start being overprotective of me, over caring for me, not letting me do things for myself. And now I'm going to lose even more confidence and independence because I'm relying on others to do everything for me, which is now leading to even more avoidance. So we get trapped in this dependency and over caring cycle, which doesn't help anyone. We know from cognitive behavior therapy that the best way to reduce anxiety is actually through repeating steps several times. If you say, no, Suraj, from Today, you're all going to try, you know, going to the supermarket and doing your own shopping list. And I'm only going to help you when you ask me. I'm going to feel really nervous the first time. And the second time, feel slightly less nervous, and then so on and so forth until I get to a point where I've just gotten used to it. That's what our brains do. We get used to things. So, how can we improve people's social and mental health? Well, if you're worried about someone being lonely, depressed, or experiencing cognitive decline, firstly ask them, what are some activities that you used to enjoy doing? Or what's a connection that really mattered to you? From a clinical psychology perspective, I usually recommend two social activities a week. But from a cognitive decline perspective, we know that even one social activity a month is enough to keep our brain active. Having said that, the more the better. It is a protective effect. We want to maximize it. The next important thing is to start small. Even a phone call or a text is quite helpful as a starting point to rebuild connections and build in a reward. As a big fan of coffee, tea, chocolate, and all sweet things, I will tell you that rewards are important. You know, tell someone, hey, let's go out for a walk and build in that coffee or lunch catch up into them. Encourage people to volunteer. So it's really important because we know that in later life, often we stopped working, and volunteering gives us the chance to have a sense of purpose. And actually, studies show that people who volunteer are more likely to reduce their anxiety than people who don't. So, highly encourage you think about a cause you care about. So, let's look at Joanna and Sam's stories again. Firstly, Joanna is refusing to go shopping on her own, so we used to dress her, write her shopping list, take her there, carry her basket. What we do now is different. Now we ask, what do you need to get for this week? Ask her to write down a list, prompt any forgotten items. She needs to get as far as she can through the list before we help. Or her physical health, we say, okay, I know you can do most of your dressing. How about you start? And I'll help you when you ask me. Or how about we get a small basket today? Or Charlie, you can try pushing it. I'll help you if you ask, if you get tired. And for our social and mental health, say, hey, how about we call someone, to have a coffee before you do your groceries? We could get some afternoon tea items while we're shopping, um, some tea and biscuits, and you can have a friend over. Let's talk about Sam now. So Sam's not leaving his home. He's afraid he won't remember people's names or key information. And gosh, that's going to be embarrassing. So what we used to do was, sit in his room, get him ready, end up putting on the radio because he's not leaving the room. What are you going to do? But now, for his brain health, we ask him, okay, well, what's something that you enjoy doing or you used to enjoy doing? You create a picture book with photos of all the places and all the important people and key information about them. And he reads this book before talking to them so that he's not worried about forgetting key information like their daughter's name or what she's studying at uni right now. We go through old family albums together. We ask about key moments in his life. It's called reminiscence therapy. You ask about key moments to help people build a sense of confidence. Ask how he overcame challenges. That's going to build his confidence for sure. About his physical health, we say, well, I know you can do most of your dressing, just like we did with Joanna, and ask him, tell me when you need help. Or we prompt him, how about we go down to the cafe or park down the road? And for his social and mental health, we say, well, what about your friend Bill? You haven't spoken to him in a while. How about we call him Or, if you don't feel like calling him, we could text him. Or maybe you can call him over once a week to play cards. And we asked, well, what was one positive thing that happened yesterday? And this is a really key skill to start doing if you're providing support to someone in home care, because it rewires their brain to think about positive things and gratitude rather than loneliness and depression. So, what we did for Sam is we created a gradual exposure hierarchy. This is simple. It's a step ladder. You have small steps, medium steps, and big steps. So, we started off with him just checking the post box, walking to the backyard. When he'd done that for a few days and felt more confident, we went slightly up. We went through all family albums. We sent Bill a birthday card or just a text. Then we had calling Bill and checking on him. Once he felt confident at that level, we moved up to the medium steps, went to the shopping center, get a coffee, call Bill to play cards, put on their favorite songs. And then we moved on to the big steps, like going for lunch and dinner and going to a cards night and ordering favorite food. So, which he's still working on, but I think he's gonna go. So, if you're looking for more resources for connecting people to local groups, obviously Live Up is a great source for you to refer people to. So, I want to quickly talk about how you can get help after someone's already received a diagnosis of dementia, because we know often there's a cliff of information and people don't have any support after diagnosis. Well, at the Center for Healthy Brain Aging, Professor Berdati has spent the last 5 or 6 years developing this resource. It's a website called Forward with Dementia and has resources for the person with dementia, for carers, and checklists for health professionals about what to ask, where to refer them to next, what to do. Really helpful resources and in multiple languages. Don't forget, there's also a free government helpline, and it's open every day, 24/7. And that's the National Dementia Helpline. If you're worried, well, this person's, you know, feeling very unsure about themselves, I don't know how to help them, they can tell you what to do. So, some take home messages for you are the social interactions are actually the key to living a happy and healthy life. Please encourage people to see others at least weekly or monthly. Help them to connect with someone they can trust and confide in. We know that reduces our risk of dementia and early mortality and mental health conditions. Also, please encourage their independence and confidence. Every step they take is practice. It's using their body, it's using their mind, using their social cognitive skills. Every interaction that they get to do on their own or as much as they can do is really good for them. And remember, small steps lead to confidence, and let's build in those rewards so that people are motivated to surf that wave of anxiety, get to the other side, and feel a sense of achievement. So, just to plug a couple of things that we've been involved in, as Marie has mentioned, we had a recent documentary where we talked about the importance of social connections, and we took Chris Hemsworth's father, Craig, on a road trip to help him reconnect with his friends, his loved ones, and his memories. And we were awarded GQ Social Force of the Year and Professor Brodati was Senior Australian of the Year. And to keep this research going forward, we actually need your help because we need everyone's voices to help us shape this into research that will actually help people. So we are looking for people with lived experience to be part of our lived experience committee because we want to know your thoughts. We can't do this research from an ivory tower. We need this to be something that everyone will use. So please contact Janelle She is coordinating our lived experience team. We would love to hear your advice. This research can only be done with your input. If you want to be a nerd and have bragging rights with your friends about all the latest brain research, please use this QR code and you get our newsletter delivered to your inbox. So thank you very much for joining. I'm happy to take any questions if we have any time.
Thanks, Suraj. I'm a nerd. I love the brain health updates. It's really important. I'm also a survivor of teenagers, so it does get better. I've had some great feedback during the session, people finding some of the stats a little shocking, a little worrying, but you gave some great solutions in there. We have got a question that talks about the old dilemma of causation versus correlation. Does social connectedness make people healthier, or do healthier people tend to connect socially with others?
Well, we know it's a two-way street. Everything is connected to everything. So obviously the answer to that question is yes to both of those things. We know from studies where they had information at each wave on people's social health, physical health, mental health, that one impacted the other. If one domino falls, the other domino will fall too. And, different dominoes will be the first to fall for different people. So it's important to stay active mentally, physically, and socially.
I love the step ladder approach that you presented as well. I think we can all take that away as we don't have to start with the big social engagement activities. We start small and we build our ways up, because even the small changes make a big difference at the end of the day. So thank you, Suraj. Thank you so much for joining us. A bit of a virtual round of applause for you. Great feedback for your session as well. Oh, hang on, there's one more question before you go. Is there a difference on loneliness stats between metro and rural areas? Oh, I reckon that's interesting.
Actually, I have the stat, if you bear with me.
Absolutely, because it's a really good question, because I would imagine in rural areas, in some ways, communities are more closely connected because there's a real sense of community, but you have distance as an impact there as well. And perhaps people want to hide what's going on. So interested in what you found.
Yes, so I am bringing it up as we speak. Bear with me for just 1 second because I do have the stat on this.
It's a
Uh,
great question. I love that our people think about this because, of course, we've got people joining us from all across Australia, and we all support people who live in very different areas. I come from South Australia, and Cooper Pedy is a long way from Adelaide. It's a lot different environment as well.
So we have the answer for this, which is in Australia, according to the Ending Loneliness Together report, we have 30% of people living in metro areas feeling lonely, and we have 35% of people living in rural areas feeling lonely. So it is a little bit higher.
Yep, yep. Well, look, let's bring back the Country Women's Association. I think they solve all the problems in the rural areas. They bring everyone together with some scones and a great sense of community. Lots of things to do. Yeah, mobility is a huge issue in the rural areas too. Take that on board. Let's all thank Suraj for what he's presented to us today. Some great learnings to take away, some great ways for us to also think about how we might create those opportunities for small changes in engagement as well, and how we might change the work we do with the people that we support.